Alan, I will start with you. Some people are saying we can trace this right back to our response, our lockdowns, etc., and that's what we're paying off now, our response to the coronavirus pandemic.
It's absolutely the case that the shutting down society, the economy, restrictions and impositions over a prolonged period has really consolidated a very difficult problem. It's actually responsible for precipitating this. It has to be said that sluggishness in productivity has been a legacy of the last 12 years and also the predecessors, because we've had technocratic rulers for the last couple of decades, the whole Blair-Cameron moment, where it hasn't been addressed. Productivity, wealth creation for all, they've been technocrats. But what happened with imposing the unprecedented lockdowns, which have been damaging across the board in health and education, but particularly the economy, with no risk assessment, was absolutely devastating, and the damaging impacts are being felt everywhere. Quantitative easing had happened before and was a problem. That got put on steroids. So the combination of all those things were a disaster.
All right, Matthew Sutherland, I'll bring you in now. I reckon that there's quite a few people out there at the moment, knowing what we know now, looking at this autumn statement now, if they had their time again, would have been more opposed to lockdowns than they were at the time.
I think it's absolutely right that we look at the policies that were brought out during this pandemic. Remember that it was a once-in-a-century catastrophe, and therefore government, and I'm not a Tory, and it was the Tories in charge, but government was acting on the hoof. Tens of thousands of people were dying. So something needed to be done. The time for discussing that, I think, is a public inquiry, so that if, God forbid, but I think it's likely, we have another pandemic, we are better prepared, and if lockdowns are not the answer, that we don't go down that route. No one wants lockdowns. I didn't want lockdowns. My job is to be in the media. My job was being an LBC presenter, being on stage. I'm sociable. I love live sport, going to the sport on the weekends.
Long walks in the rain, pina coladas.
All that sort of stuff. I'm not sure about the pina coladas. And so I hated lockdowns. But at the time, I supported them because that's what policy seemed to suggest was the best idea. In terms of why we're in the fix we are in now, we should be absolutely clear. Yes, it's partly because we're coming out of the global pandemic. The OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, I think last year suggested it would affect our productivity by 2%. We also have to talk about the elephant in the room, and that's Brexit. The OBR has said very clearly that long-term, not just short-term, but long-term, our productivity will be reduced by 4% compared to what it would have been had we stayed in the European Union. I voted to remain, but I voted to remain with my head, not my heart, because I've got all sorts of problems with the EU. So it's certainly partly to do with budget, with Brexit, but it's also to do with Putin's evil and the war in Ukraine. And we are paying the price, and unfortunately we have to pay that price because we had to stand up to the bully of Putin.
All right, Alan, I'll bring you back in now. Just kind of sticking to our main theme, which was about the lockdown side of things. I'll get emails in left, right and centre from people saying, well, look, you know, there was furlough, we shut our business down, and, you know, the knock-on effects that you've spoken about as well there. And yet, again, it's a lot of these people now, those people in the squishy middle bit, your small business owners, who are paying it off double.
Absolutely. We got a situation that during the lockdown, and it wasn't as a consequence of COVID or the pandemic, which we jettisoned the pandemic strategy as it happens for a never tested before imposition, which was utterly wrong, and many people argued against it at the time. But 15,000 hospitality, let's take hospitality as an example, 15,000 hospitality business went under during that period. Many more are suffering now. We've got a situation where the technocrats that are now taken revenge in power are actually going to squeeze everyone. So if you're a small business owner, for instance, now, on top of all the costs, it's going to be almost impossible to make money to exist. So we've seen a situation where the people who are responsible, which is both the government and the so-called opposition who called for longer, harder lockdowns and impositions, the people responsible are now going to make everyone suffer all over again. And I think it's utterly unacceptable. That's why together we say now's the time for the public to get involved and have their voices heard, to put pressure on their elected representatives and actually stand up for saying that we're not going to keep getting punished and have impositions made on us.
All right, Matthew?
Yeah, no, I don't agree with that. That sounds a bit like there's a conspiracy at the top, these technocrats who are trying to kill the country. That's not the case. Do I support this government? No. Our 12 years of Tory rule, first of all with the Lib Dems, partly to blame for where we are, I strongly believe yes. Is Liz Truss's disastrous month in number 10 partly responsible? Did she create a massive black hole? Yes, she did. Was Trussonomics fantasy economics? Yes, it is. Do we need to find a way out of this? Are we in a massive mess? Yes, we are. Who should pay that? I think the people with the broadest shoulders, as your Tory MP Hunt, also with the same surname, was suggesting just now in a very good interview. You are worried now about what the point of voting Tory is. As someone who, broadly speaking, supports Labour, And I'm not a fan of Keir Starmer. I think one of the big problems with Jeremy Corbyn is he had fans. But broadly speaking, behind him and behind this current this Labour shadow government, what is the problem for them? The problem for them is the Tories adopting a lot of their policies, and that means you could argue, what's the point of voting Labour if it were not for the toxicity
and it works.
Of immigration?
Look, on that respect, I agree with you. There does appear to be almost no major point of difference between the two parties, and it kind of renders our political choice a little bit obsolete. But go on.
Well, I would just say this as well about lockdowns. People want to shake any responsibility. People have done sort of puny mea culpas, trying to draw themselves away from their responsibility. Many argued at the time, in fact, the Great Barrington Declaration made the point as well about shielding, but we had a pandemic preparedness strategy. It was jettisoned. We had a situation where U-turns were done because some people were very shrill. There's a lack of principle of the people who are running society who want to see things through. We've seen that. We saw that with Liz Truss because she didn't win the arguments with some people. In all of this, the public are not engaged. They're not part of the discussion, and that's where we need to put them at the heart of it.